So the next time we have a crisis, someone else gets to deal with it.
In
Depends upon
society.
what else you have. So if you look
Yeah.
at the Middle East, you're talking about an area where their biggest industries were pearling, frankincense, and fishing. And in desert communities, pre-industrial, you're talking about very small numbers of people. And then you stick a straw in the desert and you get oil. And obviously you're going to focus on that. So you get the Dutch disease, if you will. In comparison, Norway was an advanced technocratic society with basic manufacturing and hydropower and nickel processing before they discovered oil. Or look at Texas. It was one of the world's largest economies. If it had been an independent country, it would have been a trillion-dollar economy before the shale revolution. So when you have crude, it doesn't necessarily make you a failed state. It depends upon what was there before.
Gotcha.
Biden was doing, he was basically saying that Venezuela, the state, owes a lot of entities in the United States, not just in the petroleum sector, a lot of entities, a lot of money. So we will loosen the sanctions a little bit so that the crude that you produce can be sold and you never see that money.
Ah,
That
okay.
money goes to the American firms that you owe money to. And if you can keep this up and not be a jerk about it, then a year from now, when you've paid off those debts, we will then begin a more serious conversation about the broader environment. So it's an if, then. So, I mean, do I think that Maduro is a great governor? No. Do I think he's the kind of person that should be allowed to be in control of Venezuela for the long run? Not really. I'd argue that maybe we're not the people to make that decision. That should be the Venezuelans. But we're setting the stage for theoretically what comes next. And if Maduro decides to go back to his old habits, then this dissolves in a day and it's no harm to us.
Right, because we got the
That's a different conversation because we have had full on state collapse complete with famine across the Venezuelan space. And this isn't Saudi Arabia where it's an easy field close to the coast. You've got a line of coastal mountains, then you've got your population belt, and your oil's below that. So if you want to resurrect Venezuela, you need to send in at least 50,000 troops and physically rebuild the country from the ground up over the course of
oof.
a decade. And then you have the option of spending 200 to 300 billion dollars to resurrect the world's most complicated oil production system. And you will not get your first oil, and if you start today, you will not get your first oil most likely until at least 2035.
That's in.
Are interested in.
Yeah.
But if you fast forward a year or two, and the Middle East is being the Middle East again, and the Russian oil is gone, and the Americans have basically built a little wall around their own energy markets, then you're going to have global energy prices that on a cheap day are looking like 150 and are typically over 200. And in that sort of
Dollars per
environment,
barrel. Yeah.
yeah. And keep in mind that this is not the 1800s when the Europeans had the gun and everyone else had spears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hugo Chavez, one of
Oof.
his last big acts before he died, is he distributed 150,000 AK-47s to the population. So anyone who thinks that this is going to be easy is wrong in every possible way.
Situation, I mean.
Libya has a similar situation of populations on the coast. The infrastructure runs through the populated areas, but the oil's deep in the desert. Now, because it's not tropics, because there aren't a lot of mountains, because the population is so much smaller, it would be easier. But the only country that I think is likely to consider that would be Italy. And I don't know how well you know your colonial history, but every time that Italy has tried to have a colony in the last 300 years, it's been a shit show. And I don't have any reason to expect anything else. Then you can basically declare independence from petroleum. And that sounds great. But making electricity is a lot more sophisticated than an internal combustion engine. I mean, internal combustion engine, I'm oversimplifying here. You light a match, you burn something, you capture the heat, you go. That's what it is, basically. If you want an electricity storage system and transmission system, you need an order of magnitude more machinery, more materials, and more different kinds of materials. You need your cobalt, you need your lithium, your copper, your zinc, and all the rest. And that means that you may, if you're successful, be able to declare independence from a world dominated by Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, and Russia. But it now means that you have to be inextricably linked to Canada and Mexico and Bolivia and Chile and Brazil and Argentina and Peru and Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia and Australia and Pakistan and India and China and Kazakhstan and Mongolia produces right now to make the green transition work. It's a lot of copper. And we just don't have production capacity necessary to support this on a global scale. And we're losing the Russian stuff. And very soon we're going to lose the Chinese processing capability. So if you're going to apply these technologies, you are only going to apply them in places where, so a good solar belt, a good wind belt, that's done in China because it's expensive. It's just people, the Chinese have subsidized the finished product for a low cost.
Got it.
And it's like it from the Chinese at a third of what it would cost you to do it yourself. But 10 years ago, when they tried access, everyone went out and built out the processing 1920s technology. It's not hard. It's not even expensive. Done. So if China were to like fall in on itself, we'd probably have about 6 months that it would take to spin all this infrastructure. Already been paid for. So we'd be okay with rare earth, copper and lithium. And getting the world's lithium comes from Chile, and they're continuing to produce more and more and more. Copper is primarily Chile again, and Russia. And Indonesia.
Jeez.
So that the Russian stuff is going away. We don't have enough of either of those to maintain a moderate green build out in the United States, much less global at scale. Now, in a post-globalized system where Chile and Australia are part of the American network, that gives us some opportunities that other countries don't have. You take their production, you concentrate it into the Western Hemisphere for sales. That just might work in places where this makes sense. But everywhere else, there's just not enough.
A lot of folks have asked.
We are, and we will.
Okay.
The industrial build out in Mexico is epic. And the Mexicans, on average, are more skilled than Chinese laborers, and they're 1/3 the cost.
Huh.
So there are very, very few economic manufacturing sectors where the Mexicans are not already the low-cost, high-quality producer compared to China.